Young people do count and that we are the future.
We're going to be adults soon, so how are we going to sort of inspire our generation to make a change?
So I think today's really about them trying to put faith back into young people.
It's time to stand up, be counted and ask the leaders.
Welcome, Natalie.
Great to be here.
Thank you very much.
In the first past the post-electoral system, there are many marginal seats where your party is unlikely to win. And I'd be interested to know, in those seats, which party do you advise your supporters to vote for?
What I would urge everyone to do, obviously I'd like you to vote Green, but what I would like you to do is vote for the person, party or policies in your constituency who best represents your views. Those policies that really feel like that's the person who I'd like to represent me. If people did that, people went out and vote for what they believe in, whatever that is, we could actually have a peaceful political revolution. One of the things I say is, I'd like you to vote Green, I'd like you to vote for someone you believe in, but if there's no one on the ballot paper who you think represents your views, still go to the polling station, and if you want to, write a rude word on the ballot paper. Ooh. Because if you don't vote, if you just don't turn up, you don't register, you're counted with the I'm happy enough with how things are group. And I don't think most people actually are.
To what extent do you think that unpaid internships are justifiable?
I think unpaid internships are absolutely unjustifiable, and the Green Party calls for them to be banned. What we've actually seen is a situation where what used to be first jobs, the job you'd expect to go into and get paid a reasonable salary for after you left university or after you left school or college, that's now become an unpaid internship.
Some people actually do end up doing unpaid internships because it's a way to get their foot through the door, it's a way to get experience, it's a way to, hopefully get a job, which usually isn't a guarantee. So I think maybe what we should be looking at is the job market much widely for young people who are graduating and unable to find jobs, who are then forced to get into internships. Yeah, I think that's an important point. I would in no way blame anyone who takes one of these because you're doing what you have to do.
I was surprised actually at how much resistance within the room there was to banning unpaid internships. And I was sort of expecting, oh, here we go, here's the first applause line. But actually a lot of people in that room seemed quite supportive of the idea that they should be made to work for free for 6 months.
I thought it was a good answer. I really did, and it was nice to see her actually, because I don't think we see enough of her. The only thing is, and I like her policy, the fact that we should ban them, but the only thing, I don't know how realistic that is.
What measures would you put in place to help solve the housing crisis our generation are facing, with more and more young people moving back home, even when there is the introduction of the housing schemes?
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, this, I think, is the one issue that people come to me most often about. We have to get away from the idea of housing as a financial asset and get back to them being homes. So one of the keys to that is build much more council housing, genuinely affordable housing, not what's so-called affordable housing in London, which is 80% of market rents. But what we want to do also is put a cap on private rents.
I wanted to know what moves you, what inspires you as a person today.
I think I'm going to go back to the very start of my politics, which is I became a feminist at age 5. I didn't actually know the word then, but at age 5 I was told, because you're a girl, you're not allowed to have a bicycle. And at that point I thought, that's not fair or reasonable. Why should, because I'm a girl, stop me doing that? And that sense of fairness and the sense that so many people are stopped from realising their potential, doing what they want to do because of unfair rules, society putting restrictions on them, that to me is what kind of drives me, in the sense of I want everyone to have a chance for a decent quality of life.
I think she needs to work on being able to show that this is something that really drives her. We saw some of that when she started talking about her own story, when she said that she was a feminist aged 5 because she was told girls couldn't have bicycles. And I thought that was a lovely story. Personal stories like that work really well in politics, but you need to be able to get passionate about policies as well.
The Labour leader, Ed Miliband. Welcome, Mr. Miliband. Cheers.
As Prime Minister, how would you engage with the vast majority of peaceful, patriotic British Muslims to tackle the extremist ideology of ISIS? And will you start to heed the advice of British Muslims that our foreign policy is a factor in the radicalisation of young people? And will you reconsider Britain's international stage with the Muslim world?
Well, Mobeen, this is a really important question. Let me say a couple of things. First of all, about what we should be doing here at home, and secondly, what we should be doing internationally. In terms of what we should be doing here at home, I think what we know about radicalisation of young people is the best thing we can do is prevent it happening, not deal with it after it happens. And what I want to see a lot more of is engaging with young Muslims, community groups and others. There's a program called Prevent. Now that's at the moment led by the police. I think it should be actually much more about community groups and saying how do we prevent radicalisation, which we all share. But the second thing I'd say to you is this. Look, on foreign policy, I have changed our position. Look, I think the war in Iraq was a mistake, and I've said that, right?
So would you agree that foreign policy is a factor in the radicalisation, yes or no?
I think it is being used. I think it is being used to say to people that somehow they should kind of take a different view and take an extremist view. But I've got to say to you, think about ISIL, right? ISIL is killing Muslims all over the world. They are not indiscriminate about who they kill.
I was wondering, recently there's been a lot of media coverage on right-wing parties and their popularity. Are you worried by this at all?
Which parties are you talking about?
Things like UKIP and people like that.
You know, I'm incredibly proud of the fact that we're an open, tolerant country. I'm the son of immigrants. My parents came here as refugees from the Nazis. And I think that is one of the great things about Britain, that we are open and tolerant. The view I take about this is we've got to kind of champion our openness and our diversity, but we've got to make it work. Let me give you one specific example where I think it doesn't work at the moment. You get a situation where people are being brought here, paid less than the minimum wage, or 15 people being put in a house. Now, that exploits migrant workers, but it also undercuts wages. So you see, I think most of the time people's concerns aren't based on prejudice, they're based on reality. You know, when people see that happening, they say, well, hang on a minute, that's not fair.
But how will you ensure tax incurred in the UK gets paid in the UK and goes to those who need it most?
Well, look, this is a really important question that Kevin asks. And there's nothing, I think, that annoys people more than tax avoidance by big companies. Now, I think a couple of things. First of all, we've got to act internationally, because that's the best way of clamping down on this. But also, we've got to be willing to act on our own. There are other countries like Denmark and others who do a much better job of actually clamping down on tax avoidance by big firms. Now, this is in the news at the moment because yesterday the chairman of Boots started telling people how to vote in the UK general election. Well, it turns out that the chairman of Boots lives in Monaco and is actually avoiding his taxes. Now, I've just got to say to you, I don't think people in Britain are going to take kindly to being lectured by somebody who's avoiding his taxes on how they should be voting at the UK general election. And you've now got this unholy alliance between the Conservative Party and people like him who are actually saying that the country can't change. I think we can change the country, and I think part of my job is to say we're going to stand up to these powerful forces who aren't paying their taxes, who are avoiding their taxes, because frankly, they have a responsibility. You know, we talk a lot about responsibility in our society. I think responsibility goes from top to bottom in our country.
One of the reasons politicians like him talk about tax avoidance is because of groups like UK Uncut, where young people took to the streets and occupied businesses and shops whose owners were avoiding tax. That has forced people like Ed Miliband rightly to engage with the issue.
Parties present their manifestos, and I don't think at any point that they do it in a way that's suitable for young people.
Has
your party ever thought about creating youth-friendly manifestos so we can actually start to understand what's going on?
It's a really important question. We're going to have a young people's manifesto. Now, I launched that process a couple of weeks ago. You should go to the Labour website to look at how you can get engaged with that. I think it's incredibly important that we have a manifesto that does reflect the wishes of young people. Let me make one other point to Elizabeth and then come back. We're going to give the vote to 16 and 17-year-olds. Now, some people might be in favour of that, some people might be against it. Why do I think it's important? There are 1.5 million 16 and 17-year-olds. Take the EMA, for example. It was abolished in one sentence of a budget speech without, and I think George Osborne wouldn't have done that if actually he thought 16 and 17-year-olds can vote. But it's also about trust in young people.
And I think it's great when they're talking about the Youth Manifesto and getting it out, because to get people into politics, I think, often it's a very gradual thing, and sometimes especially if you're voting for the first time, and you start looking into, okay, who am I going to vote for? If you don't know much about the political system, sometimes you do want something laid out for you to get you involved. You don't want to go, oh, well, what does this guy like? And then see 1,000,001 contradicting points and blame being pushed on other people who you don't even necessarily understand what everyone does. And that can lead you to not voting, because I think you can go, oh, you know what, this isn't for me, this is all too complicated.
Just quickly wanted to say I probably wouldn't have gone to university without EMA, so I think that if your party can reaffirm bringing EMA back, that would just basically be great.
We need to look at all of these things, Barbara. I will say one thing to you, though. I can't at the moment promise to bring it back, and I'll tell you why. Because we've got to make the sums add up, and we've got to get the deficit down. And, you know, there is one issue here which I do want to go to about politics and why people are so cynical about politics. Lots of politicians come along in opposition and basically say, I'm going to make a promise to you on a programme like this, and then I'll really hope you don't catch up with me in government, and if you do, I'll kind of run around the corner and hope I can avoid you. I don't think we can do that. So, look, we're going to look at all of these issues, but we'll make promises we know we can keep.
Just to move on to a question about yourself.
Yeah.
Outside of politics, what experience do you have, what life experience do you have to associate and indicate that you should be the one to represent the people of Britain?
Well, I've done a number of things which I think, I hope are relevant to this. So, I was obviously an economic advisor in the Treasury. And I think that's important. I think that's important because, you know, the economy and how we change our economy is at the heart of the country. I've taught. I taught at Harvard University.
We can probably all agree on which one that is when he was asked how he can relate to real people and all that, and he immediately went for finance and Harvard, and it's immediately people going, oh, no.
That answer where he said he was a finance advisor at the Treasury and then he worked at Harvard, I mean, that should be played over and over again as an example of why young people aren't exactly engaging with their Miliband.
Now it's the turn of the leader of the Liberal Democrats and Deputy Prime Minister, Nick Clegg. Hello. Thank you, Mr. Clegg.
Why should we feel like we can trust you? Obviously, we understand it was part of a coalition and that combinations had to be made, but we've seen now that actually, as we all knew originally, it's not going to work out, the heightened tuition fees. It's not going to get repaid. What's your stance? Are you sorry for the fact that you weren't able to reduce to zero the tuition fees?
Sure. Well, I'm not on the last part of your question. I've apologised musically, no less. No, can I just first, actually, a very important point to your sister.
Yes.
You say your sister's at school. It's really important to remember. Just forget, politics and all that, and I'll come to that in a minute. Of course I will. I've always taken this on the chin, and I'll do it again.
No,
but just for your sister and for people wanting to go to university, please don't, which you said, somehow suggest that she is paying 3 times. She's not, which is the reason, of course, why, despite all the predictions at the time, more youngsters are now going to university than ever before. More youngsters from disadvantaged backgrounds are going to university than ever before. More youngsters from black minority ethnic backgrounds are going to university than ever before. Why? Because unlike the fee system that you had under the previous Labour government, your sister doesn't have to pay anything up front, and she doesn't have to pay anything back, only until she can afford to do so.
I think the question was really, really good from Luke in the audience. I think that he started quite well. He was quite relaxed. He had like the Greek Syriza style no-tie look. But then when it got to tuition fees, you could tell he was really quite rattled.
It was a detailed and straight response, was it?
It felt very aggressive, and sometimes I felt quite attacked him when I was doing it. I mean, obviously I understood that there is no way to make everyone happy with something like this. We can't have an answer that fits everyone, but it did feel kind of like I was being belittled while I was being talking about it. Like I should have seen that actually that I'm not paying as much, but the fact is I'm still paying 3 times the amount of money, albeit it's going to be over a longer period of time.
Of course I've apologised for the fact that particular policy of my party's we couldn't implement. I sometimes wish, I only point this out, I sometimes wish I could hear an apology from David Cameron for not implementing his policy that he promised he would on immigration, or Ed Miliband for crashing the economy in the first place. But there you go. That's the way these things are. What I do think I'm entitled to say is if you look at the details of the system we put in place, it was the next best thing. It is in effect like a graduate tax. You only pay when you can, and you only pay what you can afford to.
I'll finish off by saying thank you.
Luke, we have to move on. Just some quick responses to that issue. Obviously, it's a burning issue. Carissa, just give us a couple of sentences.
I mean, with that being said, as you said, that over the 3 years, we're basically paying. We basically have to pay 3 times more than we would.
Not when you're at university, no.
But the thing is, why should I be paying that much amount of money when I'm not even secured a graduate job after?
Well, that's...
OK, we'll just take a couple more, Deputy Prime Minister.
But can I just... That's very important.
Sure.
If you don't get a graduate job, in other words, if you don't get a job which pays well, then you don't pay anything at all.
Then why should I be stuck at that? I don't want to earn that. I would love to earn more.
Yeah, but here's the thing, okay? Forget the coalition, forget me, forget the Liberal Democrats. If you had carried on with the system before, right, the fee system, which was introduced by Labour in 2003, it's really important you understand this. When you left university, you would have to start paying back the moment you started earning £15,000, which is not a very high income, right? Under the new system, you don't have to pay when you're earning 15 or 16 or 17 or 18 or 19 or 20 or you only start paying when you start paying back when you start earning £21,000 or more. So I have to, in the same way that you, of course, should be blunt with me, I have to be blunt with you.
This was the only question where the audience gave a round of applause to the questioner. People were clearly quite angry. And what I find interesting is that Clegg still speaks as if it's 2010, as if he's never been in power, as if he's a fresh face, when in actual fact, like in the past government, he seemed to be like a shadow cheerleader.
Do you ever feel the overwhelming pressure because of party politics and trying to stay with what your party wants, but you've got your coalition as well? Do you ever feel like you're compromising yourself?
Sure. So, Charlene, it's a really important point in this. I would love to be Prime Minister. Of course I would. I'd love to not have these questions from, it was Luke, wasn't it? Of course I would. Who wouldn't? I'm a human being. Of course I'd like to say, yeah, I can do exactly what I want. I can do my whole manifesto in full. It's a democracy. I didn't win the election.
Did you feel sorry for him that he's had this 4 years, he's had a tough time, and now he's got to stand there and defend a record that he might not necessarily be that proud of?
No, I don't feel sorry for him at all, because that's his job, and that's what he obviously wants to do. He wants to be successful. He wants to be a leader, and so that you have to roll with the punches on that one.
And now it's the turn of the leader of the Conservatives and the current Prime Minister, David Cameron. Prime Minister, thank you very much for making it. Cheers.
How are people on zero-hour contracts expected to pay for their food, rent, travel, and then expected to plan for their financial futures?
Well, what we want, Michael, is to make sure we've got decent jobs for everybody. And in this economy, we have seen more people get work, about 1.75 million more people getting work since I became Prime Minister. But there is no doubt that you're right. There are some zero-hours contracts where people are abused. And so we've said these zero-hours contracts where companies can effectively forbid you from working for anybody else, we've said that is wrong, and we've legislated to stop that.
You say that it's good for people to go to university, but at the same time there are graduates and undergraduates who have no jobs. There are high employment. What do you say to this?
Well, what I think is what we should do as a country is make available apprenticeships and university places so that everyone who feels they can benefit from going to university can go.
He really looked somewhere between uncomfortable and almost dismissive. He didn't look as if he wanted to be there. I do think he warmed up.
David Cameron does a lot of these sessions where he goes into workplaces and stands in front of a JCB and talks to people on the road. But I think seeing a load of sort of young people who just don't really care about what their boss thinks, just giving him both barrels, it's quite different from the average political interview. And I think the best thing was watching some of the reactions on the questioners' faces when they didn't think what he gave was up to scratch. They kind of showed it without really holding back.
And I would advise, when it comes to my own children who are still at primary school, I'd advise them, as you go through school, think about either doing an apprenticeship or think about going to university rather than leaving school at 16 or 18.
He struggles when he tries to sort of pretend to be a man of the people. So he was asked about apprenticeships and started talking about his children and saying that he might advise his children when they leave school to do an apprenticeship. And I just winced at that.
Why did Britain fly the Saudi flag at half-mast if the country has such an appalling human rights record?
The reason for doing that was that there's a long-standing relationship between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and our United Kingdom here, a relationship between our monarchs, a relationship between the governments. We don't agree with lots of things that the Saudis do. We don't agree with the way they treat people, for instance, criminals, when we make very clear those differences. But when the king died, as a mark of respect, we thought it was right to show that respect.
But isn't that disrespectful to the people who the Saudi king has sentenced to 1,000 lashes? What? And you mentioned that there's a relation.
question there was absolutely fantastic when he said it's a case of respect, and she said, what about the respect for all the people who've been tortured by this regime, for the Raif Badawi, the blogger who is waiting to be flogged again and part of his sentence of 1,000 lashes? The trouble with that is realpolitik. There is no answer to that. You cannot, as Prime Minister, say, yes, I think they're quite unpleasant people, but we need them. That's not something you can say. So I did feel for him slightly there, because there is a very obvious answer to that question. It is just that he cannot give it by virtue of being Prime Minister.
Christopher Idden, why are the Tories going to scrap housing benefit for 16 to 21-year-olds when every pensioner still gets the winter fuel allowance?
Well, the reason for this is, I think, as I've been saying earlier, when young people leave school, I think there should be opportunities to earn by doing an apprenticeship or getting a job, or opportunities to learn by an apprenticeship or going to university. But I think the option of leaving school, signing on, moving out of home, getting a flat and living on housing benefit, I don't think that is any start to a life at all. So I don't think it should be an option. Now, of course, there are some people who, for whatever reason, cannot live at home and have to be away from their parents, and we will always help. But the option that some people have today of leaving school, signing on unemployed, getting a flat, getting housing benefit, I don't think that is a good option for young people, and I don't think it should be available.
I think that that's a very bad approach, because you're using an example of a small minority of people that just sign on for the sake of signing on to punish a large majority of the people who actually do sign on for so many reasons. You know, they have kids, so they can't live at home because of family issues and problems. As somebody who can actually live at home at 18, who decided to go back to FE college and then are now at uni, housing benefit was the only way that I could do it, and I think that you're making a big mistake by taking that away from young people.
Well, I don't agree that this is somehow a tiny minority of people. What I'm saying is, if you have to leave home, if you can't stay at home, then of course you should make that benefit available.
Which party leader will eradicate the farcical Prime Minister's Question Time? Don't we have enough comedies on TV without having this rerun over and over again and again?
Oh, now this is the... Amen. Look, I at 5 minutes to 12 every Wednesday, I can tell you, I put my head in my hands and think, why have I got to do this? It's a nightmare. But does it have a purpose? I don't know. Maybe you all think it hasn't got. I think there are 2 points to it, I suppose. One is that members of Parliament, from whatever party, they can ask you any question they like. And so you've got to try and be on top of your game and on top of everything that's happening. And that has a knock-on advantage, which is it means that as Prime Minister, you've got to know everything that's going on in your government. And so it does enforce some accountability of the departments and the ministers to you and through you to Parliament. So yes, it is noisy and crazy and infuriating and all the rest of it, but there is some sort of point to it. Does that make any sense? Well, let's ask the audience.
Let's ask Chris.
What do you think, Chris? Scrap it or do it?
I think PMQs is horrible. I think it's one of the biggest disengagers for voters. And I think it's really petty. I think everybody involved, including yourself, you stand there, and you're shouting at other members of the House. It's disgusting, and I think it's horrible. I think it's
Chris,
abhorrent.
Do you think 16, 17-year-olds should be allowed to vote in elections?
Right. Well, if you think I've said some unpopular things so far, wait for this. I'm afraid I think you've got to have one age of majority, and I think 18 is, in my view, I understand the case for votes for 16 and 17-year-olds. But my view is 18 is a better age. It's the age where so many other things kick in, and I think it'd be better to save that voting age for 18. Online voting, I mean, I don't have any objection to it, but I think in a way we're asking the wrong question. You know, the reason people don't vote is not because it's too complicated to go down to the polling station. The reason people don't vote is they don't think it makes enough of a difference. And so I think we ought to focus on trying to make sure our politics is delivering the things people want, rather than simply just trying to work out how do we make it easier to vote.
I thought it wasn't the strongest performance I've ever seen. As we discussed before, he was having a bit of a sticky wicket this time anyway, given that the Conservatives don't naturally appeal to the young. He had a difficult set of policy proposals. But by God, they asked him some tough questions, didn't they?